welcome back to the Turning 30 podcast, a place where we talk about what it's really like to turn 30. I'm your host, life coach Emma Wilson, and I'm here to help you feel better, get unstuck, and be more confident in your 30s. Today's episode is another guest episode, and we're really going to be talking about a topic that I personally think is at the crux of how to enjoy your life in your 30s. And this specific guest was somebody who had been recommended to me by numerous clients who had actually reached out to me and said, listen, this author has just written a book that is really relevant to you and your audience, and I think that she'd be a great guest. So I always love having podcast recommendations. So that really is a shout out to you. If you have somebody who you would love to see on the podcast, please tell me, because I always take it into account. So what did I do? I went and I messaged Radhika, the guest today, and asked her to come on, and she obliged. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this conversation. The book that Radhika is going to be talking about today, and the one that is relevant to turning 30, is called 30 Things I Love About Myself. And it's a book that starts where the protagonist is in prison on the morning of her 30th birthday, filled with self-loathing and low self-worth, and she feels that her life has fallen apart. She's just gone through a big breakup. Everything just feels like, for want of a better word, a shit show. And she then decides, by going into the personal development space and exploring herself on a deeper level, to turn it around. And really, it's such a parallel with what so many of my clients and myself do and did when they turned 30 and felt like enough is enough. I want to have more. I want to learn to love myself. I want to create a new path, a next chapter. And I really recommend to all of you, if you like this podcast episode, if you haven't already, go and buy the book. It's a really great read. I devoured it in the space of 2 days on a beach holiday, and it was a really fun and good, easy, page-turny read. So let me introduce this week's guest, author Radhika Sanghani. She's also a journalist and a screenwriter. She has written 2 young adult novels, and her latest book has just come out. I actually think it's come out in the past few weeks. And the book that we're talking about today was her last release, which she released last year, the beginning of 2022, which, as I said before, is called 30 Things I Love About Myself. She's also a freelance journalist for publications such as The Telegraph, Daily Mail, Grazia and Glamour. And she's also a body positive campaigner, and she founded a movement called #SideProfileSelfie, which when I read about it, I really loved. Also a yoga teacher, and she also does volunteering. So Radhika is such a turning 30 inspiration. I really, really love hosting on the podcast authors, because I just love hearing their take on also becoming published and how it was for them to follow that dream in their 30s. So let's dive into the episode. Hi, Radhika, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
I'm so happy to have you here. As I was saying before we started, I inhaled your book, and I know that so many of my listeners and my community are going to benefit from hearing from you, hearing about Nina, who's the star of the book, her story. And what led me to you was 3 of my clients actually recommended you to come onto the podcast and told me about your book and said, you have to invite Radhika on. She's amazing. Her book really inspired me. So super happy that we're sitting down to talk today. And I guess I wanted to start off by asking about how much Nina, the main character of the book's journey, which for everyone listening starts off that it's her 30th birthday and she is spending the night in prison, and how much of her journey is reflected in your own turning 30 journey.
So I guess the biggest thing Nina and I have in common is that, so essentially, for people who don't know, actually, I'll just explain this first, is that Nina has to essentially go on a self-love journey. Like, she's very much at rock bottom when she's turning 30. There's the prison stuff, but there's also the fact that she's just broken up with her long-term partner, who she was meant to marry. She's got to move back home to live with her mum and her brother, and her career's not going well. So it's that rock bottom place, and she's basically got no choice but to start loving herself. And she realizes that that's the one thing she's not been doing. And that's the thing that Nina and I had in common, that I kind of in my late 20s ended a long-term relationship with someone I thought I'd marry. I quit my stable newspaper job to go freelance, even though I'm quite an anxious person, and was like, how am I going to go freelance? What am I doing? And what else? It just felt like everything in my life was in flux. Like I wasn't as close to my old friends anymore. I felt like I didn't have new friends who I was aligned with. And I really just felt a bit like, what do I have right now? And externally, it didn't feel like a lot. And that's when I realized I needed to go internally. Like I needed to go inwards and start loving myself. And so that journey that I went on, that I'm probably still on, to be honest, like 6 years later, changed my life so much that I really wanted to write about it. And instead of writing a non-fiction book, which I thought could be a bit preachy, because like, I don't know, it's also not like I'd become like the Dalai Lama or anything. You know, I was just a woman in my 30s who now loved herself. I kind of decided to write it as fiction instead, and just share a lot of my lessons and a lot of the funny things that happened to me as well, I guess, through Nina and her journey to eventually love herself.
Wow, I love that. And I think it's great because there were so many lessons in the book that were like reading nonfiction, but that just came through in a more lighthearted way. So I think it was a great way for you to almost like share all that knowledge that you gained.
It worked.
Yes, it worked for me. It worked for me. Amazing. So when you went on your journey and your what I call turning 30 journey, did you also make this list, the 30 things that you love about yourself?
Yeah, I actually did. I didn't do it like Nina. So Nina does it throughout her journey, and it's like a very conscious decision. For me, it sort of happened later. Like, I don't know, to be honest, it's a habit I do quite regularly. I think it first started, I remember I was 21. I was in New York for the first time. I was alone and I was like, oh my God, I'm based in Sex and the City. This is so cool. And I like, I sat at a bar and on a napkin, I tried to write a list of things I loved about myself because it felt really like empowering. And I wrote 5 and they were like really shallow and awful. And I was like, oh God, we'll deal with this later. And then, yeah, I guess over the years, I kind of thought about it. And then when I was on this journey, I was like, actually, I want to do a proper one. And it's something I still come to. Like, I don't have, you know, like a list stuck on my wall or something, but it's more just, I think of it as an exercise that's really useful to come to, you know, like almost like a journaling thing. Like if I'm feeling a bit bad, I might want to just connect with all the things I'm grateful for about myself and my personality and the things I've built up in my life. Like, I just find it quite reassuring.
Yeah, because I'm sure that your book has helped so many women who are reading it to connect with the gratitude and reconnect with those parts of themselves. Why do you think that turning 30 is such a difficult time, such a hard transition? And leading on from that, why is it so important to go on a quote unquote journey at this time?
So I think for me, because I can really only speak for myself, it was so hard because of expectations I had around turning 30. Expectations that were partly mine, but were partly from society of what my life would and should look like at 30. And then when I got there and it looked nothing like that, I was like in absolute panic. Even in the years running up to it, it was always in my head, like, you know, by 30, I'll have this, by 30, as like this big, you know, benchmark. And then when I got there and I didn't have it, I felt like I wasn't enough. And that was like that core feeling that was terrifying. And I knew like, okay, like I have, you know, 2 choices. I either carry on with my life and this is where I'm at. I just, you know, this is exactly where I'm at. I kind of don't really have a choice but to just accept it. So I can either accept it and my choice is accepting it whilst hating myself or whilst loving myself. And so that's when I went on that journey to be like, that's why I do think it is a journey, because, you know, like in life, we're always going to have expectations that aren't met. We're always going to want things that don't pan out the way we want them to. And so for me, the one thing I always know I can have is my own back. And that's what I wanted to build up, that kind of confidence, that self-confidence, the self-belief and the self-love, the self-compassion, changing that inner critical voice in my head. Like, you should be here. Like, why don't you have this? You've done it all wrong. To, okay, like, I love you. You did your best. You're where you are. Maybe you're meant to be here. Maybe there's something good about this situation.
Yeah, I love that, because I think so many of us struggle with that acceptance part. I always talk about it in my coaching, that it's like when you get into that reflective mode, which often comes up before a big birthday or before a big life event, but you know, to 30 is the landmark that we're here to speak about. And you realize that you want to change, or you realize that something doesn't feel quite right. And then it's like you automatically want to just run ahead. I always say this, is like you just want to go and change. And you're like, okay, I want to take action. I want to do all the things. I need to like get the new job or get the new relationship or go through a breakup or whatever it is. And it's like you want those external things so much, but you just miss that middle part, which is the acceptance. And I always liken it to, if you're trying to build a house, you wouldn't not like make the foundation smooth. You would check if it was bumpy and what was there. But if you were to build a house on rocky foundations, then probably the house is going to fall down after one gust of wind. And for example, someone criticizes you or something happens. So I think acceptance is the part that we just miss. And I think as a coach, I find it really hard to explain how to accept. I have tools and techniques and everything to do it, but it's something that acceptance is something that's really hard to teach. Do you have any tips for acceptance and things that have helped you to be more accepting of yourself?
Oh, that's such a nice question. Firstly, one thing I want to say is actually just something a friend told me that I find really helpful that sums up everything you just said, is like a 3-word mantra, which is awareness, acceptance, action. And it's such a nice reminder for me to do things in that order. Like I become aware, I see the issue. I always want to jump straight to action, like you said, but I always forget that crucial step. And actually, no, a tip that has come to my mind is trying to do it with compassion, because for me, acceptance is so tied up with understanding why something happened. So say I'm in a place I don't want to be at, like say I've just failed something, I don't know, like a work failure or something. I want to jump straight to the action. Like, how can I fix it? How can I make everyone like me again and be successful again? And what I need to do to accept it is first understand like why it happened. Like, okay, maybe I messed up because I was really stressed. I'm stressed because this happened. Like, can I be nice to myself? And when I bring in that compassion, it allows me to see it so much clearer and actually not feel the fear of accepting it. And then I can be like, okay, it's not my fault. And the second it's not my fault, I'm kind of soothed. And then I can see the situation for what it is, and I can accept it more because it's not so scary.
Yeah. I think that that's a really hard step to do, because people get afraid that they're going to blame themselves. It's like it's like really hard. I always say there's like a really blurry line between taking responsibility and then having the compassion for that, but then blaming. And people are so bad because they just say, oh, I've done this thing. And for example, like you said, you fucked up something with work. And people are saying, oh, you've done something wrong. And it's like really hard to sit with yourself in those negative emotions. And then you get to the point of blame, like, and then you go into the self-criticism and the self-doubt. So I love that. Leading with compassion is such a big one. And something that I loved about Nina in the book when it came to acceptance, that just came to my mind now as you were speaking, is that she often did things where she took time out of her every day to consciously think. It's almost like a ceremony, like in the scene where she goes to the beach and she's with a crystal in her bra and she's like having those moments and experience. So funny, if you've not read the book, you're like, what? But basically Nina goes on her spiritual journey, which just honestly, so many things made me laugh, because I also went on this similar journey when I was 33, where I discovered all things spiritual. And like she actually takes time out of her life to accept, to do things that are different. And that's how I teach acceptance to some of my clients. I say, have a ceremony, like go outside, put music on, light a candle, burn some things, throw some things away. And I think that often we just think, oh, we're just going to wake up one day and feel better. And it's like, no, you actually have to take time out of your life to do these symbolic things.
Oh my God, I completely agree. And it's just making me remember as well, like that this is all so much work. And, it makes me laugh because sometimes my family, like my job is basically like, I don't know how to describe my job, I guess a freelance writer. But sometimes they'll be like, what have you been up to? And I'm like, what have I been up to? Like, I've been like exhausted. And they're like, but you don't really do that much work. And I'm like, yeah, but I've been doing inner work. And the question, what have you been up to, just drives me insane, because I feel like people just always want external stuff, and actually often what I've been up to is like working on acceptance and like healing my past. And I just think we really need to honor that this stuff is exhausting. And now I've built up this compassionate tool, that's not the right word for it, but I don't know, I've built up this compassion towards myself, the ability to be compassionate. I can tell myself, this is exhausting, have a rest. Like, learning to accept your reality is the hardest thing in the whole world. That's like essentially the spiritual journey. Like, that's basically what Buddha dedicated his life to. And I'm expecting to just do it in like 5 minutes because I read this book or this Instagram post that told me to do it,
And there's this whole world now, because self-help, personal development, life coaching, therapy, all this stuff is like I guess, having a moment in the past few years. I think a lot of people just think it will be easy. And it's like, oh, I'll just book in some therapy sessions, or I'll just go to, I don't know, a retreat somewhere, and then I'll come back healed. And I think it's almost like a button that you press. I see this a lot, and it's so true what you just said. And it's so ongoing. It's such a journey. You even said it at the start when you introduced yourself. You said that, you know, it's still ongoing, my turning 30 journey. Like it never ends, you know? And I feel like that's true for your whole life of doing things. So yeah, it is tiring. It reminds me of a funny meme that I saw on Instagram that was like, I think it was like taking the piss out of Gen Zs, but it was saying how they were asked for, what's it called, maternity leave to work on their inner child. And I was like, yes, this is what we all need. We all need time off work to work on our inner children.
That. I completely agree. And you know what? Actually, the humor thing is so good, because I often bring humor into things when I'm trying to accept stuff. You know, it might not always work initially or with really, really big things, but there comes a point where when I'm trying to accept something difficult, like a breakup or something, right? Like at first I do have to deal with that abject grief or pain. But then there's a point where I need to laugh, and I just need to be like, okay, here I am again.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love humor as a tool for self-acceptance, and just a humor just for everything. Really. That's just like in life. We experience so many emotions, the spectrum of emotions that we experience, and just laughter and playing and enjoying life and having lighthearted moments. Just, yeah, you're right. Completely change everything.
Sometimes it's a choice, right? Like the other day I got 3 parking tickets, not 1 but 3.
Oh my God.
I was like livid. I felt every negative emotion you could feel, and like so much self-blame, you know. And then I was just like, well, they do say like good things come in 3, like maybe something. And I just started laughing, and just it made everything better again, you know, just that lightness, and it made things manageable. That's what happened. And I used to think humor was kind of a negative coping mechanism, like deflecting from feelings. But a therapist once said to me, he was like, I actually think it creates space for more emotions. Like it enables you to actually breathe through it and then feel everything. And I think that was cool.
Yeah, I really love that. So you mentioned before briefly about your family asking you what you do for work. And I know a theme in the book with Nina is that her family, or her mum in particular, was quite big on the expectations of her and often was upset at the direction that her life had gone in. Can you share a little bit more about that, if that's something that you also experienced, and how the pressure and expectations have been emphasized or almost made bigger because of the community that you grew up in?
For sure. Like, I think firstly, probably most families do this in some way. I think especially as you said, you know, the turning 30 thing is such a big thing in our culture as a whole. But I do think that like different communities, you know, have other stuff going on as well. And I'm British Indian, and that's what I made Nina, so I could explore that as well. And I think for me, growing up in that community, like I grew up in London in a not very like Indian part of London. But I had a lot of cousins and relatives who lived in Leicester, which is where Nina lives, which I always saw as like a little mini India. And it was just so interesting for me, like feeling, I don't know, just feeling those differences, and just how it often felt to me growing up like there was one way to live, because so many people just did the same, just lived their lives in the same way. And nobody ever said to me, you have to live your life in this way that we're all living our lives in. But I just, on some level, like absorbed that that was what I was meant to do. And when I wasn't, I felt like, oh God, am I doing it all wrong?
Wow. I just want to say, sorry to interject, but it's like word for word what you just said is how I would describe my experience of growing up in a Jewish community, because I speak about this a lot on my podcast. But for those of you who this is the first time listening, I grew up in a secular Jewish community, which means that nobody ever gave me a book and said you have to follow these laws. It was just expected that things would be done in that order. And I'm not sure about you, but my parents were extremely liberal. They didn't sit me down and say, okay, at this age, you have to be married. At this age, you have to do this. It was just implied. And it was often just based on what everyone around me did. The people, like I always say, it was almost based on what my really close friends' siblings were doing. And, you know, it was like, you'll become a lawyer, an accountant, or a doctor. They were kind of the only options that were really presented, and, you know, lots of coercion there. And everyone was expected by the age of 26, 27 to be settled down, move to the suburbs, have a really, really secure job. And I think that, again, exactly want to repeat what you said, these turning 30 pressures don't just exist in the Jewish community, the Indian community, and other communities, that they're really universal. And I know that from speaking to people about it all day, every day around the world. But it's younger, I think, for in Judaism anyway, in the secular community. 30 and being a woman who is single is considered old. And I really felt it. It was something that I really struggled with. But I really like what you said, that nobody told you to do it. It was just implied. It was just expected. And I have to say, on reflection, that's been one of the hardest parts of my journey, is being different to my community. And now I'm on the other side of it, you know, unmarried at 36 almost. And for them, they look at me like this alien from outer space, like, oh my God. Like, and it's always like, oh, you're the different one. You're the one who moved abroad. You're the one who gets tattoos. You're the one who does yoga and all these things. But I think that there's not enough people speaking about that fear of being different to your community.
Oh my God. I relate to everything you just said. Also tattoos, yoga, being single.
We're the same.
Yeah. And I guess that's also just been so healing for me. Like, that's been one of the biggest things, honestly, is I found it scary to be different. And I didn't sign up to be the different one, you know. I wasn't this like massive rebel as a teenager or anything. I tried to be the good girl all the time. So when I ended up as this like different, you know, black sheep, I was like, wait, what?
It wasn't supposed to be like this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I was meant to be married by now. And so I felt lonely at times. And what's been really healing is literally to meet people like you, and to meet all the amazing friends I have now who are also doing things differently. That has been the most healing thing in the entire world, finding my tribe and just knowing that I am not in this alone. And my tribe can be from all over the world, you know, different ages, backgrounds, whatever, but just that sense of feeling like we're doing things a bit different and it's a bit scary and we feel a bit alone. Like, those people, when we talk about that stuff, that's when I feel safe. And that's when I know I'm where I'm meant to be.
Yeah. I mean, this conversation is probably going to get boring for the listeners, because I feel like you're just speaking about what I speak about in every podcast episode, and everything you're saying, I'm like, yeah, same, me too. But no, I mean, I really resonate. And I think I moved country at 27. And when I did, and I didn't go to a Jewish school or something, but I'd really stuck with my Jewish friends from home. And then I went to a university with all my best friends. I gap year with them as well. And then I moved to London and we were all together. And then at 27, I moved away. And it was really my first school experience of leaving my home friends and being out there in the world. And it was so refreshing. It was like, wow, it was like a breath of fresh air, exactly like you just said, to meet and to make new friends with people who had different experiences in life and different things to offer. And I was just naturally attracted to those who are a little bit less mainstream. And it was like almost like this secret part of myself that I didn't know existed before was suddenly validated. And from that moment, I think every year I've made new friends. I've always made it a mission to, like you said, find a tribe. And it's what I promote now. I talk about friendship and how important it is to meet new people and to, to strengthen and solidify existing friendships is like a key to enjoying your 30s. So yes, I mean, I couldn't agree more. In the book, Nina has this storyline with a really old friend of hers who's getting married, and they grew apart. And then they, at the end, I don't want to do any spoilers because I feel like people will listen to the book. I'm not going to say what it is. I'm not going to say it. But have you also found it difficult to, I guess, having changing friendships in your 30s? Is that something that you struggled with? Again, talking about the friends getting married, friends getting pregnant, people going in different directions.
Yeah, massively. And actually, here's something that is actually quite different for us, because growing up, I always felt different as well, because I actually didn't really have any Indian friends. And all my friends were actually mainly Jewish. So I was like in a community that wasn't mine. And I've always had really lovely friends, but maybe felt a little bit different to all of them. And so I never actually got a tribe until much later in life. And I've actually often felt quite lonely without maybe even having the language to admit it to myself.
Yeah.
It was always busy and popular and at parties, but I don't think I always felt very seen or that I had enough in common with everyone there. And also I think just the fact of, you know, being Indian, living in England, but not having an Indian community, and then having an Indian family, but feeling different to them, basically just feeling different to everyone. was my theme. And so, yeah, I had all these friends who maybe we just weren't that similar. And so my friendships have shifted a lot. Like they shifted when I went to uni. I also felt quite lonely at uni, which I didn't expect. It's meant to be the best time of your life. And I was in London and I was like, I just feel like really alone. Yeah. And then I guess, yeah, honestly, it was only when I did this journey in my late 20s that I was like, I deserve friends I have things in common with. Like my friends so far have been wonderful and I'm still close with some of them. But I realized like I'm pretending to be like them. Like I'm acting sometimes so that I don't feel alone. Whereas I need to stop acting. I need to be my absolute true self and see who I attract that way. And it was really scary. And I started to meet new people. And since then, it has just been like absolute flow. Like I'm like you, I'm constantly making new friends. Some last, some don't. Mostly there's no drama. Occasionally there might be a little bit, but it's all okay because I know who I am now and I like myself and I trust that enough other people do as well. It's just getting bigger and bigger and it's so expansive and I'm so grateful.
That's so nice. I think that it's so important to remind anyone who's listening who, I don't know, at whatever age that you are, if you feel that you don't have friends that are on the same page as you, that there are things you can do about it. I think that we have this preconception that if you haven't met your group of friends at uni or in high school or in your early career in your 20s, and that's it, you kind of condemned to a life of loneliness, but it's just so not true. And there are so many ways to meet new people. Just out of curiosity, how did you make new friends? Was there anything specific that you did? Any places that you went that helped you meet new people?
So I guess my advice when I talk about this, because people often ask me about this, because I really honestly always have new friends. And it's just people like, how would you keep making these new friends? And every year my birthday party just gets bigger and there's always new faces. Anyway, it's fun. But I always say to people, do what you love, like don't go to a thing because you think you'll meet people there. Like do the thing you want to do, but just be open. So I would meet people at yoga, like the cafes I go to where I sit and write, all the things I normally do in my life. I just started actually saying more than hi to people. And I started sharing, obviously not massive stuff at the beginning, but just like if someone's like, how are you? I'd be like, I'm actually quite tired, or I've actually had a bit of a rubbish day. And I don't find it scary to share anymore, be vulnerable or be honest about how I am. And I've noticed that if I'm honest about how I am, that inspires the other person to do the same. And then before you know it, we're having a really real chat. And then maybe we're going for coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just honestly that openness. Like I've made friends who work in shops down the road from me who I've now become like legitimately close to, just because every time I'd go in the shop, we'd speak about how we actually are.
Yeah, and I think you just used the word before, scary. When people aren't used to having vulnerable conversations or making these random chit-chat conversations with people that they don't know, or even going to events. Going to a yoga class. Like I remember, I still get social anxiety actually when I do new things, but I remember years ago being nervous to even just be in a space that wasn't familiar. And I think that we need to reframe it. Like if something feels scary, then do it. And I always say this, and I talk a lot about dating as well, of like, you have to do the things that you love and make these conversations and just put yourself in that place, because otherwise probably not going to make new friends just sitting in your living room scrolling on your phone.
And also like say it's scary, like I also teach yoga, and if someone came up to me and was like, it's my first class, I'm a bit scared, I'd be like, oh my god, and like it's okay, like thank you for sharing. And some of my students have become my friends and some of my teachers have become my friends because we say the true things. So I think you're scared to admit that you're nervous if you're doing a new activity. And maybe totally will help someone else be vulnerable with you.
Yeah, it's so true. Tell me, could you share a little bit about your journey to becoming a published author? This is a selfish question because I'm on my journey to becoming an author. I say published, we don't know yet, but I would love to hear a little bit about it and how your career shifted as you entered your 30s.
Yeah, of course. So actually, funnily, my first book I wrote that was published, I wrote when I was like 21 or 22. And it's a book called Virgin, and it's a hilarious book in like all the ways. I can't believe I wrote this book. It's like a comedy about a 21-year-old girl who's desperate to lose her virginity, and I always describe it as like a feminist American Pie. It sounds
brilliant. It sounds brilliant.
It's like Fleabag before Fleabag came out, and people are like, why is it so graphic? I'm like, I don't know. It's a comedy. Anyway.
So I'm downloading it on my Kindle as we speak.
So I wrote that and a sequel to it in my really early 20s. And it's kind of a dramatic thing, but I basically had a near-death experience. I almost died in a bus crash in Thailand, where a lot of people did die when I was 22 years old. And that changed so much in my life because I saw mortality up close. And I came home in February, literally exactly 10 years ago. Yeah, that February 2013. And I wasn't okay. I started getting therapy for the trauma, but then I also really just felt an urge to write and to write comedy. And it was my healing thing, basically. And so for the entire month of March, I just sat and I wasn't working because my job gave me time off. And I just wrote this book that ended up being this bizarre sex comedy. And yeah, it just was the most healing thing in the world because it just took my mind off where I was and just gave me this outlet to write and create and laugh. And I also wrote it to inspire younger girls, I guess, to like put themselves first and not care so much about men and male pleasure and anyway, all of that stuff. So that book I wrote mainly because I was freaked out that I could die. And I just needed to like do my dreams quickly. And yeah, and then I didn't know what to do with it. But by the time I finished it, I kind of wrote it maybe as a bit of a joke, just to have written a book, just to send to my friends maybe. But when I finished it, I was like, I actually think it's quite good. So then I just Googled, how do you get a book published? And they were like, get an agent. I was like, how do you get an agent? And I just did what the internet said. And I emailed it off and I got an agent really quickly. I was super lucky. And then she sent it out to publishers and I got a book deal. It was amazing. It all flowed, to be honest. And I know a lot of authors don't have that experience. And then those 2 books came out, but I found it really difficult because there were a lot of expectations that these books would do really, really well. And I had expectations and I kind of just wanted them to be bestsellers. And then they didn't become bestsellers. And I freaked out and was like, I failed. But I never voiced this to my agent, and I wish I had, because I just basically then just quit writing books and was like, I can't do it, it's too much, I'm going to focus on journalism, I'm good at that works. And then yeah, in my late 20s, when I went on this journey and I decided to quit my job, all of that stuff inspired my next book, which was 30 Things I Love About Myself. And I just decided in that moment that I didn't care about the fear. I was just going to write this book because I needed to write it for the love of writing the book.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I did that, and my agent loved it, and it got published, and I spoke to her about it, and she was like, you know, like most books aren't bestsellers, like what's wrong with you? And I just realized, like, wow, I had this fear that I'd built up it's just all in my head. But anyway, now what I try and do with my novels, because that's actually what I'm doing full time now, basically, is writing books. I just try to not focus on the outcome and just focus on the love of it. Like, I write because I love it. And that idea is something I'm passionate about, that I want to share with the world. And that's my job. Like, I can't focus. I can't control whether the books get published. I can't control how many people read them or the sales. All I can control is like doing the process to the best I can and enjoying it.
I feel like it's such a micro example of like life, you know, it's like the same thing. It's basically, we can't control things around us and you've just got to enjoy the journey. And I think it's so true. And it's funny, isn't it? Because in our minds, we do have these fantasies, like you said, the expectation, and I'm sure you had it, where it was like, oh, I'm just going to publish this book and then it will be like in the #1 New York bestseller chart. And I feel like that even with this podcast, with the work that I'm doing, it's like, no, like things build up slowly and things take time, and that's okay as well. You know, sometimes slow and steady wins the race. And I really am seeing that the more I'm in this world and the more I interview different people on the podcast, they often say the same thing, that it's lots of hard work went into behind things, and that it wasn't just instant success overnight, which we often see from other people. And then we think, oh, that should be us. That should be our journey too.
It's so good to speak about it and say it out loud. And even you saying that, you know, I just think we all need to be more honest. Because otherwise it's just, for me, it was in my head, this secret fantasy that I'd become an instant bestseller, and then this secret, you know, misery and rejection when it didn't happen. But the second we say it out loud, it's like, oh, we're all thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's all ridiculous.
I think it's just human nature. Every time I launch something in my business, so for example, if I launch a group program, I'll be like, I'm fine with getting 10 people, that's fine. But then secretly I'm gutted if I launch it and not 10 people don't sign up within 3 minutes of me launching it. I'm like, I do not understand why everyone hates me. And then it goes from like No one's signing up in the first 10 minutes to like the thought spiral of like, oh my God, I need to like, quit my job and close my business and move. So yeah, totally been there. I think lots of people listening will also relate to that. Just to finish, I thought it would be nice to talk about the topic of self-love a little bit more, because that's obviously the main topic of your book, that's 30 Things to Love About Myself. And you mentioned a few things. You mentioned finding your tribe, acceptance, doing the inner work. What would you say to somebody who is in their 30s or about to turn 30 and they're feeling maybe not even rock bottom, just they don't love themselves? It's hard for them to make a list of things that they love about themselves. Apart from recommending to go and write the list, what would you recommend that they do if they're at this point of feeling, like you said, that flux and that, just that transition phase?
I think often the first thing actually is people don't even realize that the answer is loving themselves. I think like people often are in a flux or a point where things aren't working and they feel a bit rubbish, and we're always looking for the external, right? So we just want that relationship, that job, that whatever, and then we'll be okay. And I think the first thing is just realizing that actually that's not what's going to make you okay. The only thing that will make you okay is when you feel good with yourself. And so I always want to like remind people of why they're doing this. Like self-love isn't just a thing to have that's nice. Like it is basically going to be the number one thing in your life that will like allow you to live your life and be okay. Like it's just, for me, it's like the absolute base.
Yeah. It's like we're talking about the foundation before. It's the same thing, but also there's just so many people think, oh, if I just solve the problem externally, then I'll be fine. So I see this all the time. It's like, I'm not happy. So if I just move job, I'll be happy. I'll move country, I'll be happy. I'll do X, Y, and Z and I'll be happy. And I always say like, but your brain's coming with you. Like, sorry to tell you, like you can't, unless you have a lobotomy, it's coming with, so you better get used to it. And it's difficult to explain to people who I guess have never been in this world before of exploring themselves and doing that internal work, what a huge difference it makes to love yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's why that has to be like the number one thing I start with, right? Like explaining the point of it. And I think once people realize like, actually, you know what? I see your point. Like if I feel okay with myself, then I'm always going to feel okay, whether I'm single or married or employed or unemployed, I'm going to feel okay within myself. And so, yeah, but I guess like, how do you actually do it? I don't know. I think you've just got to start small. Like I always say, like, try and think of it as like how you sort of would maybe a best friend or a friend, right? Like, how do you start to love somebody else? You kind of get to know them. And it sounds silly, but sometimes we don't even know ourselves. Like, I spoke about how with some friends, I was pretending to be someone else sometimes. Like I was acting. Like, who even am I underneath it all, right? It's like realizing who you actually are and then getting to know that person and starting to see what you like about them. You focus on the stuff you like first, like that's the whole thing about the self-love list that Nina does. She focuses on what she likes first, her honesty, her humor, her whatever. And then slowly as time goes on, you'll build up the ability to like go a bit deeper maybe and start to accept the things that you don't like, your flaws. And that's like the next level of self-love, when you're able to get to a place of like, okay, I'm also like, for me, I'm really impatient. It's annoying. I'm stubborn. It's annoying. I don't like that. I wish I wasn't so stubborn and impatient, but I can forgive myself and I can love myself anyway. And sometimes I can even love myself because of them, because, it's funny or it's sweet or whatever. And I can do that. I can go to that next level, but you've got to start slow. So yeah, it's kind of, and, it's your journey with yourself. So you need to like do it the way that works for you. And you can ask yourself, like, I know it might sound silly, but like journaling, like, I don't know, how shall I do this? Like, what feels right? Does it feel corny for me to like, do mirror affirmations? Okay, maybe that feels weird, but maybe it feels quite nice to like take myself on a mini break alone and spend time with myself and see what I want to do on holiday, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love the point about how it has to be right for you, because actually just before I was speaking to the girls that I'm in a group business coaching program, and one of them who isn't a coach, she was like, oh, I just cannot with all this self-help stuff. It's not for me. I can't do it. I'm so burnt out. But every time I try to meditate or do something or even journal, I feel just disconnected to it. I just roll my eyes. And I was like, I replied to it saying, firstly, and this is exactly what you said before, if you don't believe it's possible to love yourself, to change, and this in this specific example, it was, if you don't believe it's possible that these things can actually contribute to your happiness and well-being right now, then nothing's going to happen. You won't be able to commit to it. But the second thing I said was just find what works for you. I love journaling. I think that journaling is where you meet yourself the most honestly. And I think that it's an amazing tool to get to know yourself. Some people hate it. Some people really dislike it. I personally find it really hard to meditate. I have a really, really fast mind. I can do guided meditations, but silent meditations, it's like, no, it's just not going to happen. And that's, after years and years and years of trying. So I do what works for me. For some people, they love yoga. Some people need cardio and weightlifting. Some people like dancing. Some people, it's like all the different ways that you can get into your flow and experience these things. And I think that's a really important point, is that we're not robots. We don't all like the same thing. We're not all, exactly like to do things in the same way. So it is important to just, I guess, sit with yourself and say, when do I feel good? When do I love myself? And what can I do to increase that?
Totally. It is literally a process of like getting to know yourself on a deeper level. Like, it's that simple. But you can get people involved as well. Like, if you really can't think of things you love about yourself, like, ask people. I remember I had a terrible breakup once, and I was like living in Barcelona and I was lonely and sad. I just emailed all my messaged my closest friends and family and was like, can you just tell me something you love about me? And they sent me this stuff and I was like, okay, I feel better now.
I love that. So that's the homework for everybody, is email or send a broadcast out on your WhatsApp and ask everybody what they think of you. No, not what they think of you. That could be dangerous.
What they love about you.
What they love about you. Yeah. Not what they think of you. That could just be the opposite of the intention. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And everybody who's listening who resonates with anything that we're saying has to go and read your book. I highly recommend it. And if anybody wants to know more about you and find out more about your books, where can they find you?
Probably just on my Instagram page, which is just at Radhika Sanghani. And I have another book coming out soon on the 7th of July, which is called I Wish We Weren't Related, which is tapping into more of the family stuff that we discussed.
Oh, wow. It sounds like a book that I'm already pre-ordering it on my Kindle now. It sounds very relevant. Thank you so much. And I will see everybody on the podcast next week.